In November, 6 Democratic lawmakers recorded a video message directed to members of the U.S. military and intelligence agencies. It was blunt, ominous.
Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders.
You can refuse illegal orders.
You must refuse illegal orders.
For months, the Trump administration had been ordering strikes on boats off the coast of Venezuela and Colombia, which many Democrats and legal experts say are illegal. Since returning to office, Trump has successfully expanded his power over his own party, the courts, and the American people. Now, like many autocrats around the world, he's trying to exert control over the military too.
We should use some of these dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, National Guard, but military.
So could Trump follow in the footsteps of other strongmen around the world and use the military against his own people? I'm Justin Bergman, International Affairs Editor at The Conversation in Australia, and this is The Making of an Autocrat, Episode 6, Co-opt the Military. Joe Wright, welcome.
It's great to be here. Thanks.
You are a political science professor at Penn State University and an expert in dictatorships around the world. You actually had an early introduction to a military dictatorship or a country emerging from one when you studied abroad.
Yeah. So as an undergraduate student, I studied at the Catholic University in Santiago de Chile. This would have been in, I believe, 1996. And they were about 6-7 years away from a transition from military rule. And the family that I stayed with while I was a student down there, their youngest son was actually at the military academy when I was studying there. So he's about my age. And one afternoon, the family invited me to go to watch her son play in the military band. I said, well, I'll go, sure. So I arrived at the military academy and they had a large football stadium, we'll just call it that. And then out comes the head of the military at the time, who was the ex-dictator, General Pinochet. He gave a short speech welcoming the new students, or novatos, and he then proceeded to walk up the steps of the stadium to an exit behind the stadium. And when he did that, people went to the center aisle of the stadium steps to greet him. My Chilean mother hurried me over to greet General Pinochet, and she vigorously shook his hand and thanked him for his service to the country. And I had my hands behind my back, had long hair and ponytail at the time, and he made a derogatory comment about my haircut and moved quickly to the next person.
So even at that time, several years after he was out of power, he was still quite revered in the country, it seems like.
By some, yes. It's a very politically polarized country, in part because many had supported the military dictatorship and the coup in 1973, but many had not. And many people in that country were victims of military repression, torture, jailing, assault from the military government, much of it illegal.
So this is not something people in Western liberal democracies think that much about. We don't often think about the military as a threat. How do militaries typically operate in democratic countries like the US or Australia or Canada that's different from the Chilean experience?
You know, Western liberal democracies have experienced decades, over 80 years probably, of domestic peace and economic prosperity, in part because the military is just not a threat to the elected civilian governments or to the citizens of the countries they protect. This means, first and foremost, that the military is apolitical. It doesn't have an allegiance to a particular ethnic group or sectarian group, no allegiance to a particular ruler or political party or political faction. And so in practice, what does that mean? It means that they have military officers who are selected based on their competence in military affairs, typically demonstrated by working their way up the military hierarchy and chain of command, and not one where the leader himself or herself interferes in officer selection to promote a political ally or members of a particular ethnic or sectarian group or promote one of their family members. You know, most importantly, the military in Western democracies, the officers hold a norm of civilian control, and they're trained to follow the rule of law. And this means obeying the civilian leader who decides on a military mission, even if the commanding officer or the soldier doesn't necessarily agree with the mission. But civilian control does not, and it did not mean this in Chile, or it does not mean it in the United States today or any other democracy. It does not mean that the military officer must follow illegal orders. Right? So having professional officers means having military folks who know the difference between legal and illegal orders, and who know that they have a moral and legal and indeed professional obligation to disobey illegal orders.
And this was the point of that video the Democratic lawmakers were making in November, pointing out that military members are not required. In fact, they must disobey an illegal order from a president. What did you make of that video when it happened? What did it say to you about this moment in American politics?
First of all, it's not surprising, right? It's been clear to me that since Trump appointed a loyalist with pretty much no leadership experience as the defense secretary, that Trump would attempt to order the U.S. military to do things that are likely illegal according to U.S. law. Right. So back in February, Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth purged the military of the military lawyers. These are apolitical and impartial lawyers who are tasked with deciding whether or not the way that the military operates and indeed whether the commander-in-chief's orders themselves are legal. And so once Trump replaced these military lawyers, once he replaced them with his own loyalists, it was really only a matter of time until Trump asked the military to do something that is likely illegal. It appears in this case, at least some of the officers and soldiers have complied with what now legislators from both parties have described as probably an illegal order.
The Navy has supported our mission to blow the cartel terrorists the hell out of the water. You see that?
So that said, the militaries throughout the world do lots of illegal things, mostly with impunity. So I can think of recent examples from the Russian, Ethiopian, and Israeli militaries that come to mind. Lots of behaviors that violate international laws. So what Trump is ordering the U.S. military to do in the Caribbean is not necessarily a huge difference from stuff we see all the time in the news. But in terms of what this tells us about where we are in the United States, I am very concerned that getting the military to do illegal things will not only put U.S. soldiers at more risk when they do engage in international missions in the future, but in most countries, getting the soldiers to violate the law, and this is what happened in Chile, even when they do it in small ways, it's a first step to using the military to target domestic political opponents, whether they're unarmed, nonviolent protesters or political opposition politicians. That's what really worries me.
Let's go back to Trump for a minute and talk about how things have changed under his leadership. How else has he changed the norms or the rules since taking power when it comes to the military?
He certainly seemed to have purged a number of leading military officers, general-level officers, very early on. And apparently, at first glance, it looked like some of the rationales for that was because they were not white or not men. And so that might be that he's privileging a particular ethnic group or particular gender when it comes to the appointment of officers. Typically, that's the kind of thing that leaders do, privileging a particular sectarian group or ethnic group or their family members or loyalists, privileging certain people in the selection of high-ranking military officers. In the United States itself, that is typically something that is an internal military affair. So in some ways, the military is a concern, but the larger concern is what he's done to the internal security apparatus in the United States. This would include the FBI, and also ICE. And so he's put people in charge there who appear to be loyal to him, people who have not had strong political careers without him. Certainly that was the case with Kash Patel, who heads the FBI. These are people, when I say a loyalist, one sort of way of thinking about a loyalist is somebody who doesn't have good career prospects without that leader in power. And I think Kash Patel would certainly fulfill that he was not didn't have sort of appointments of great power, hadn't worked his way up to more and more powerful positions within the government until Trump comes along. And so his power is largely dependent on Trump. And he's unlikely to retain that kind of political prestige and power once Trump leaves office, which induces him to be quite loyal.
You mentioned ICE. How big is ICE now?
My understanding is that the most recent congressional budget package that was passed basically provided money to greatly expand funding for ICE to the point where, last I saw, it'll basically make ICE the 15th or 16th largest military in the world. And so for comparative sake, that's like about the same size as the military of Turkey and Canada. And that's not the U.S. military. That's just ICE.
How is Trump using ICE in a similar way to, say, a secret police force that you've seen in other countries?
I'm not sure that parallel is quite there yet. So far, ICE has mostly targeted non-citizens who are resident in the United States. And ICE has a really poor track record of hunting down actual criminals. We have police that do that pretty well. Instead, ICE is imprisoning thousands of non-citizens and some U.S. citizens, in fact, mostly Latino men. ICE agents have attacked and destroyed small businesses, destroyed personal property, such as vehicles. They do it seemingly without having to compensate the victims. ICE also seems to be operating, at least in some places, outside the rule of law. And I guess in that sense, it's highly problematic, parallel to a secret police. Right? ICE has targeted churches and religious workers. Agents have assaulted these people and denied them the right to practice religion without security forces threatening to arrest them. Right? So all those are bad things. All that said, ICE has yet to arrest opposition candidates. ICE has not assassinated or tortured union leaders or journalists or church workers or opposition candidates. So those are all the kinds of things that secret police do. And so in that sense, I would say that ICE is not operating like a secret police agency. But all that could change, right? ICE now has a robust propaganda division to help shape Americans' perceptions of the people that they're targeting.
If you don't, we will find you and we will deport you. You will never return. For too long.
So if you have this really large militarized internal security force with that size, and it does set its sights on opposition groups in the United States, well, that's obviously going to be a huge issue. I hate to say that. I hope I'm wrong about ICE targeting U.S. citizens, but it's already started to happen in a small scale, and I hope it doesn't happen in large scale or get used for partisan political purposes.
We'll be right back.
Hi, I'm Anna Walker, host of a new podcast called Jane Austen's Paper Trail from The Conversation. From a scandal-filled bun shop in Bath to a windswept walk along the Cobb in Lyme Regis, and even a glittering Regency ball, we've travelled around England to bring Jane Austen's world to life through interviews with today's foremost Austen experts. Listen to Jane Austen's Paper Trail wherever you get your podcasts.
Joe, in most dictatorships, it takes many, many years for a leader to gain complete control over the security forces. Can you talk about how this has worked in other countries?
In most dictatorships, a lot of countries will have a military and then as well as various internal security organizations, intelligence forces, interior troops, a federalized police force, not in the United States, but in most countries, even like a large presidential guard unit. And so the way that the leaders can personalize or take control of these security forces, it can mean a couple of kind of things. One way of doing that, which is really a legacy of Leninist systems, such as the Soviet Union or in China with the Chinese Communist Party rule, is that the ruling party creates what we call a commissar system, in which they have political officers who are beholden to the ruling party, so they get promoted from within the party and not within the military. They have political officers that are placed alongside the commanding officers of each unit, the military officers. And so both political officers and military officers have to sign off on any order, like move troops or do other military actions. And so that's a system of sort of very strong political control over the military that keeps the military subservient to the ruling party. But that's mostly something that happens in countries with a Leninist legacy, in China or Laos, Vietnam today. But in many other scenarios, the leader, not necessarily the ruling party, but actually the leader, is able to gain control over the security apparatus. Right? One method to do that is to create a new security organization or to take an existing one that's relatively small and expand both the size of it and to change its core mission and use it to do something else. And so a good example of this is anti-terrorism units have been basically blown up in a place like Uganda. The son of the president was put in charge, and then it was moved from going after international terrorists to going after the domestic political opposition.
The second method is to take what you have and then put these loyalists in charge. So a great example of doing both of these at the same time is in Syria. Hafez al-Assad did this starting in the 1970s and the 1980s. He took a division of the army and gave it more weapons, paid its troops better than other units in the military, gave it more training, selected only people from his sectarian group into that military unit. And then, of course, he put his brother in charge of that unit. And this is the military group in Syria that would become essential for carrying out the president's orders to kill his own citizens, to kill the Syrians he didn't like.
And one reason for this loyalty, and specifically in Syria, was that it makes it harder for the military to remove a leader from power who is trending toward being an autocrat or is already there, a dictator.
Yeah, so there are sort of two ways that you're going to remove a leader from power. One is violently, and the main way that happens is through a military coup. And so if you have a division of the military that is very loyal to you, it makes it much less likely that other members of the military are going to have a coup. And if people know that in the military, then they're not going to attempt a coup in the first place or even try to plot one. And that's actually the rationale for why Assad set up his security apparatus in Syria that way. He basically didn't have many coup attempts because he had restructured the way the security apparatus operated. The other way is through either elections, or if elections don't work because they're rigged in favor of the incumbent, than through nonviolent protest, unarmed nonviolent protest campaigns. And this is ultimately what brought down the Chilean military regime. It's ultimately what brought down Serbian dictator in the late 1990s. This is actually quite a common way to get rid of leaders who won't leave from the ballot box when they lose, is nonviolent protest. And having a personalized military is super important from a leader's perspective, because those people are going to be more likely to shoot the protesters, to follow that illegal order, that immoral order, to shoot the very citizens who, while in the opposition to the leader, are nonetheless the citizens of that country. And so in most countries, soldiers and people, military officers, they get into the business of doing the military because they want to defend the citizens of their country, not kill them. But when you've done years or decades of personalizing the military, you create groups within the security apparatus who are willing to kill their fellow citizens precisely because they think either those fellow citizens are going to try to get them, or if the leader gives up power, that security unit is going to lose all of its privileges. If you have a group of people with the guns who think that everything in their lives is going to fall apart and they might be attacked by armed groups from the opposition, if they believe that's going to happen, then they're going to want to defend the leader in power, even if they don't like that leader. They'll just be scared. And when they do that, then they're going to shoot the protesters if they think what comes next could be worse for them.
And look, the U.S. has this long tradition of an apolitical military. So throwing it forward, where do you see this all going under Trump? Do you see a situation where there's a showdown between a military commander or soldiers who do say, I'm going to refuse an order?
So I think a lot is going to depend upon how Trump and the people in his orbit think about the end game. Do they think that if they were to leave power peacefully, should they lose an election? Do they think that their assets that they've gained while in the presidency will be preserved? Do they think that it'll all go away? Does Trump think that he will have immunity? I mean, the Supreme Court gave him immunity. And the logic of that from the Supreme Court's perspective is precisely to help induce him to leave office peacefully. But if he doesn't believe that and his backup is up against the wall, would he give an illegal order to the military to shoot American citizens? And I would hope, and I have strong belief, that there is not a single member of the U.S. military, up and down the U.S. military, from the lowest ranking soldiers and recruits to the highest ranking officers. I would dearly hope that not a single American soldier or officer would follow an order to shoot American citizens.
Joe, thanks for talking with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
You can read more from Joe Wright at The Conversation. This episode was produced by Isabella Podwinski, sound designed by Michelle Macklem. Our head of audio is Gemma Ware, and our head of editorial innovation is Ashlyn McGee. Misha Ketchel is the editor of The Conversation Australia, and Stephen Kahn is the editor-in-chief of The Conversation UK. The Conversation is a not-for-profit media organization. You can sign up to our free daily newsletter by clicking the link in our show notes. You can also listen to more of our shows wherever you get your podcasts.